My name is Brandon Anderson. This is my IPP for Business 501 with Professor Frederick Green, ENMU, Spring 2018. Today, I'm going to be speaking about ethical issues surrounding pensions. What is a pension? Pension is defined as a regular payment made during a person's retirement from an investment fund to which that person or their employer has contributed during their working life. The next thing that I'd like to talk about, I want to talk about the history of pensions. We've just gone over what the definition of a pension is. Now I want to talk about the history of pensions in America. In 1975, the first pension was offered by American Express. American Express employees were eligible after meeting age and service requirements as well as company approval. Banks and railroads were the first industries to offer pensions. By 1930, a lot of large corporations created pension plans for their employees. The Internal Revenue Act of 1921 encouraged pension plans by exempting contributions from federal corporate income tax. In 1935, President Roosevelt signed the Old Age Survivor and Disability Insurance Program into law. This is also known as Social Security. In the 1940s, labor unions bargained for pensions in their collective bargaining agreements. During the same time, the Investment Advisor Act required that investments were managed by registered advisors. In 1950, GM started a self-funded pension. This enabled them to invest pension funds into stocks. Prior to this time, pension funds were invested primarily in bonds and fixed products. By 1950, 1 in 4 non-government employees had a pension. By 1960, the number had grown to 1 in 2. In 1962, the Welfare and Pension Disclosure Act was amended and shifted more responsibility to the government to manage pension fraud. The Quahog Act was passed in 1962 and made pensions available for small businesses and the self-employed. In 1974, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act was passed into law. This act made plans more secure. The act also limited vesting to 10 years or less. This act also created the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. This corporation ensures benefits in the plan in the event the pension was to fail. In the early 1980s, 401ks burst onto the scene. In 1997, Roth IRAs were created. In 2006, the Pension Protection Act was signed by President Bush. One of the main things this act did was to force companies with underfunded pensions to pay a higher premium to the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. I wanted to go back real quick and talk about 1974. This was a huge year for pensions. There's two things I want to talk about: the Employee Retirement Income Security Act and what came out of that act, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. The ERISA provided employees with plan info, information about their plans. It set a minimum standard for participation. Fiduciaries were required, so this made it so that companies had to have a fiduciary responsibility to their employees to manage these pensions properly. It also allowed participants in plans to sue the plan management and the company for mismanaging the plan. And it also guaranteed payment, and this payment is guaranteed through the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. The PBGC is for private sectors, it's not for government pensions. It's insurance for terminated plans. So what the PBGC does is when a plan is terminated or when it is about to terminate, they take the assets that are remaining and they distribute out payments to people that paid into those plans. Now, this is not a guarantee that those people will get their full pension, but they will at least get a portion of their pension. Companies pay a premium to the PBGC, and this premium ensures their pensions and that people will get paid something. This presentation is about the ethical dimensions dealing with pensions. So I want to spend a little bit of time and talk about why pensions are so important. Pensions are a promise from an employer to an employee. If employees meet certain criteria, they get a benefit, and they know what that benefit is ahead of time. They call these defined benefits because you know how much you are going to make. Another reason that pensions are so important is because they change our behavior. If we know that we have something coming to us down the road, we plan on those monies to live on in retirement. If we knew that that pension might go away or that it might not be available to us, we would probably save more in the current time. Another reason they're so important is because they're dealing with our money. All of us, we work, we go to school, we improve our lives so that we can earn more money, so that we can improve our lifestyle and have more freedom and flexibility. Another reason that is so important is because pensions have a direct impact on our lives. How did this happen? This slide has a little illustration of California's pension debt and how it's growing. The caption says, in 15 years, state and local government pension systems have gone from a surplus to a multi-billion-dollar underfunded liability. So you'll see that the pensions were not properly funded and that there is more money coming out of the pension fund than going into the pension fund. I wanted to talk a little bit about the pressure on pensions that we may not have known about in the 1930s. The first one I want to talk about is there are fewer employees in the workforce participating in pensions, and a larger percentage than was ever anticipated is retired. So we have fewer people putting in and more people taking out, and this is a problem. Also, a lot of pensions were funded as a pay-as-you-go, where retired employees were paid with the money of current employees that were putting into the fund. This is very similar to a Ponzi scheme where old investors or older investors were being paid off by money from new investors. We also have historically low interest rates. These low interest rates hurt pensions because most pensions are invested in financial products that have very low interest rates, such as bonds. Employees also have a longer life expectancy. This longer life expectancy was not expected, so there's a bigger liability on the pension fund than people knew. The other thing I want to talk about is the balance sheet and stock valuations. There was a big pressure on these pensions as companies tried to outperform one another. It's similar to the mortgage crisis where some people were mismanaging their mortgage portfolio, but if they managed it properly, they were not going to be competitive in the marketplace and people were going to go elsewhere for mortgages. So if you did try to manage your mortgages properly, you would go out of business. And that's something that we see with pensions. Companies try to underfund their pensions and not treat them responsibly so that they can be more competitive. This is a graph showing how underfunded pensions are. The green line shows funding status, and the red bar shows liabilities, and the blue bar shows assets. You will see basically since about 2000, almost every year, the liabilities have exceeded the assets. This is going to be a huge problem going forward as these funds start to fail. One of the biggest ethical issues that we see is pension underfunding. This could be an inaccurate measurement of assets and liabilities, low funding goals, unfunded increases, loopholes, paying too low of premiums to the PBGC, and these are set by the federal government, overregulation of the PBGC, lack of transparency, no or low funding during good times, political factors, and shifting responsibility to the pension insurer. This slide shows a chart of the top 10 failed pensions in America. You'll see there's a lot of airlines on this list. The thing that I wanted to point out is that if we bailed out as a country just these 10 pensions and we paid all the claims, the $27 billion in claims, that would be $214 per household that we would have to pay out just for the top 10 pensions. Another thing I want to talk about is legislation. There's been a lot of legislation dealing with pensions. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters versus John Daniel in 1979 went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court overturned 2 lower courts. The big thing that came out of this was that the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, do not have jurisdiction over private pensions. This led to a lot of mismanagement in pensions. This is another chart that shows just how much the liabilities exceed assets. This is from the PBGC, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporations, and this shows just how much the liabilities have grown to. Academics have done a lot of research with ethical issues surrounding pensions. Some of these relate to portfolio management activism. Should fund managers choose active or passive investment techniques? Is it moral to use beneficiaries' money for corporate intervention? Does it make a difference if it is financially motivated or socially motivated? This list continues. Some other unanswered questions deal with staffing, and some of these questions deal with who should manage the fund. Should it be managed in-house? Should it be managed by a third party? Other unanswered questions deal with employee compensation. Is it ethical for fund supporters to transfer their employees from one defined benefit to a defined contribution? And that's something that we're going to talk about here in just a second. How many funds should be made available to sponsors to choose from? A lot of these questions need more research done so that there can be better answers. So what is the answer? Most companies have been getting away from the defined benefit and going towards a defined contribution. Now, there is a difference between these two plans. A defined benefit, the company makes a promise to give you a benefit for doing something. Usually that's tied to your years of service and your income. And once you're vested and meet those eligibility requirements, the companies are obligated to pay that out to you. So the difference between the defined benefit and the defined contribution is the defined contribution, the companies are only required to contribute. They are not required to create a result. And that's where most companies have been going. One of the questions I had, are we more moving towards defined contribution, or are we just moving away from defined benefit? Defined benefit plans are a huge liability to the company because it's something that they have to meet at some point down the road, whereas a defined contribution is paid, and once it's paid, there's no more liability. You will see the blue line trending down as less companies are offering defined benefit plans, and you will see the red line going up as more companies are offering defined contribution plans or 401ks. One of the things that we see with defined contribution is a shift of risk to employees. Some of the facts: 1 in 3 Americans have no retirement savings. Americans have a lack of faith and understanding of markets. A lot of this is due to downturns in the economy and the financial crisis of 2008. And people who are not prepared for retirement have a cost to the rest of us. There are a lot of features that people like to talk about to try to make these defined contribution plans more attractive. One of these features is opt-in versus opt-out. And what this is companies promote these plans by auto-enrolling employees. So instead of an employee filling out paperwork to get into the plan, they would have to fill out paperwork to get out of the plan. This takes away some of this decision in hopes that an employee will make the right choices because it's harder to opt out than opt in, so they will actually start saving. One of the features we also talked about earlier on is in 1997, the Roth option came out. And this gave people the ability to pay taxes on their retirement income now and put it away into retirement accounts and let it grow tax-free in the future. I want to talk a little bit about things that ethical companies have and that they need, especially in dealing with pensions. They need to have education for their employees about their offerings. They need to have transparency. They need to have direction. They need audits, and they need reporting. Some of the benefits that ethical employees have is they have lower turnover, they weather difficult times better, they're less volatile, and they attract higher performing employees. In conclusion, pensions are in trouble. A lot of this trouble is due to the ethical dimensions surrounding how pensions were managed. Companies have dipped into their pensions to supply the money with needed cash. Companies have also used pension funds to purchase company stock and invested too much of the company pension into stock. There's also been a massive underfunding of pensions. There has been an evolution in financial instruments over the years. We've gone from pensions and defined benefit to defined contribution. One of the issues with the defined contribution plans is it puts so much responsibility on the employee. I think it'd be really good if companies could bring pensions back and model them after funds that are very successful. One of these funds is the pension fund for the Norwegian government. Ethical companies need to look out for their employees, and their employees will look out for them. This is a list of the different sources that I used in my research.